somewhere within the first 5 to 10 plays of the game, the other team's quarterback must go down, and he must go down hard.
Perhaps no single evaluator of talent in the NFL of 1974 believed more strongly in his own expertise than Renegade owner Al Davis. He opted to have his Raider personnel do all their own player grading at a time when most NFL teams were part of cooperative scouting services.
Blesto, Bears, Lions, Eagles, Steelers, that's Blesto. SEPO was Central Eastern Personnel Organization. They were scouting combines. That was part of the mystique of the Raiders. We refused to be part of that.
I always wanted to belong to a combine because I wanted to get as much information on the player as I could. But Mr. Davis, when I was working there, you get the information. That's your job. Don't worry about somebody else's information.
Al trusted his own ability to pick players and find talent. Al was a really good coach before he became an owner.
The great rivalries continue.
And he could look at a player and decide whether this guy could play or whether he couldn't play. And more specifically, could he play for me?
Just win, baby.
They had a scouting network that went everywhere. There was a story that someone claimed that they went to the dark side of Africa. The only non-natives they found there were 2 missionaries and a scout from the Oakland Raiders. There may be some truth to that.
They made decisions based upon intelligence as well as, the 40 times. I was never timed in the 40 with the Raiders. I had hamstring problems. They didn't want to time us. They could tell in the practice if you could run fast enough. But they also had to know where you're going to make a mental error. So it was part of their system.
In the Raiders School of Player Grading, Dave Casper scored high marks, even while some of his numbers were not the most impressive.
He wasn't the fastest of guys. He was like a 4.7, but he was one of those guys who knew how to get open.
240-pound tight end Dave Casper was a massive spark plug of the Irish offense.
He had a reputation for not being the most coachable guy. There were some questions about how committed he was to football. But, Al Davis was a guy that was not afraid to take chances on someone.
Many other teams probably wouldn't have picked him in the second round. But that's a perfect example of the Raiders identifying what they wanted for their team and he being a perfect fit.
There's no question that Al Davis was obsessed about the Raiders, its brand, its colors. I got phone calls from some of the people in his office on a regular basis, watching what I might have said to the press or what was communicated to people, how he portrayed the Raiders.
Al does it his way. He's not going to do it how the NFL does it. And he got 3 rings.
When he took on Pete Rozelle in the National Football League and was defeating them in the courtroom, this got him more joy.
I really believe that Pete wanted the Los Angeles franchise for himself. Yeah, and he wasn't going to get it from me.
I couldn't tell you necessarily that Pete Rozelle or any of the other owners rooted against the Raiders, but I don't know that they were always rooting for them. With all the lawsuits back and forth and all the controversy, there was for sure some bad blood.
That's an amazing scene.
No, it was awesome. It was like they just won the Super Bowl. And those are the kind of things that happens, but this was out of respect. This was out of respect for the silver and black. This was out of respect for the wins. This was out of respect for bringing this team back to Oakland again. You can go on and on and on from the great players to, to all the great wins, to 3 Super Bowls. It's the brand. And it just shows that there's people out there that appreciate the brand, that the Raiders are what they eat, what they live, what they breathe during football season. And it's such a big part of their life. And to be able to show that appreciation, that love for Mr. Davis, for the team, for Hugh Jackson, for the organization moving forward, it was very moving.
He's considered by many the greatest coach in the history of the Oakland Raiders. He brought them Super Bowl championships. He's a great video game guy, a great coach, and a great analyst. He was on KCBS Radio this morning. These are John Madden's thoughts on Al Davis.
I met Al Davis in the early 60s. came to work for the Raiders in 1967, and directly or indirectly, I was with him the whole time, and I was in shock when I heard it, and I'm still a little that way. Al Davis was the type of guy that you don't believe is going to die, and it's Al Davis. And when you hear it, it just doesn't seep in. I mean, even though, this part of you says that, that he's going to die, but there's another part that says Al Davis will never die. And then you think that, he's sick, he's not doing well, but he's a fighter and he'll fight this and he's going to win. And then, you hear the call and you say, well, you shouldn't be shocked, but it was very, very shocking, and I still am. If you really knew him and were a part of him, he was the most loyal friend or person you could have. And then there was a lot of people that he didn't know. Well, of course, he couldn't be loyal to them. And, and like I said, I introduced Al for induction into the Hall of Fame. And Al Davis isn't for everyone. And, everyone's not going to say that, Al is this or that, that he's perfect and he's, and all these things. But if he's your friend, if you played for him, if you coached for him, if you were part of the NFL, he was that guy. And there was no one that could be better at being that guy than Al Davis.
That's John Madden on KCBS Radio from this morning. Not a show that revolves around the NFL stayed away from the Al Davis conversation. Everyone had a story. Everyone had something they wanted to share.
Yeah.
Everyone had something. It's like everyone needed the group hug there, whether it was verbal group hugs or whatever. And we saw emotion. We saw emotion all weekend. It was crazy.
Absolutely. And you know what, Jimmy? It's, I love what he had to say is Al wasn't for everybody. He wasn't. And, everybody has an opinion about him. It's the intensity around that opinion, Jimmy, is you love him or you hate him. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You hate him or love him with the same amount of intensity. There's not a lot of people that have that. And that's because of the man he was. And he stood up for what he believed in, and he was a fighter. And it didn't matter who you were, what you were. If you were 350 pounds, if he didn't like you, for some reason, he was going to fight you. It didn't matter, Jimmy. And that's what he was. And I respect that. I really do. He took on the league. I respect that. Because he believed in certain things and principles, and he had to do it his way.
Every time a new owner came into the league, he went out and sought that owner out and talked to him about the NFL to give them that little bit of lesson about the league.
Yeah.
Jerry Jones to this day says that, he's the guy who helped me maybe take on the league in my own way. There were some things Jerry Jones has done that haven't been all that popular.
When you have great coaches, then after you have great coaches, you get great players. You have a great organization, and you tell them one thing. Just win, baby.